We're going to start off like this. We're going to first of all give you an outline of what is the mitzvah of Emunah. We're going to then go to how do you do Emunah. What are you supposed to believe in to constitute the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Emunah? And then we'll go to the final part, and that will be the challenge that we face in this society that we live in having Emunah. The obstacles. Let's call them just challenges. First of all, I want to give you not Gemara trivia, but some interesting piece of information. But I have to start with a question. Is there anyone, how many of you feel, and no humility or modesty, that you're, whether a man or woman, whether you are a tzaddik? Are there any tzaddikim here? I know it's modesty.
Define tzaddik.
As opposed to a Russia.
Well, let's say just a tzaddik. You can do, I didn't ask to define it. This was Aaron's idea. Let's, and Tzidkoni is here.
Relative to study.
No, but I'm not asking what it is. I'm saying, is anybody ready to volunteer? I know there are many of you sitting in a very humble position, says the rabbi really doesn't know, but I am truly giving it on. And I'm going to burst your bubble now. Because the Talmud tells us, in the tractate Bava Basra, it says, Gimel Averos Ein Odom Nitzel Mehen B'chol Yom. There are 3 sins that no matter how pious and how righteous, but somehow you have some connection to them. And they are. One of them is called Hirhure Avera, thinking thoughts that aren't really so kosher. And we're not going to elaborate on that. The second one is Iyun Tefillah, concentration in prayer. To be completely concentrated in the sense of focused. To be completely concentrated, I don't think is the right way to put it. But to be completely focused for every word that you say. Not the whole davening, just in the tefillah. Okay, just in the Shemona Esrei, in the Amidah. Every word, every letter, complete concentration. As a matter of fact, there were stories of many tzaddikim that they would go over to a person in shul and give him shalom aleichem. Because they said, I haven't been far, I haven't left, I haven't gone away in 25 years. Yeah, but during Shemona Esrei, you're in the market and you're traveling here and you're traveling there and all your machshavas and your thoughts. And the third sin that it says that a person is not really ultimately trips up on a daily basis is something called avak loshen hara. Avak means a dusting of gossip. A dusting. The Gemara gives an example. This is in Bava Basra, very fascinating. Kuf Samach David of a base. It says, when, for example, somebody will say, oh, that person, his house, the fires are burning all the time. Meaning to say that there's guests there all the time. So they're cooking and they're preparing. And but somebody can misinterpret it and say the fires are burning. It's a party house. They're partying all the time. So it's a slippery slope, very difficult to prevent this. But the Gemara also tells us another 3 sums. And it says, and most people are not familiar with this term, but you're familiar with the concept. It says, Sholosh Averos She'ein Oimdim Bifnei Pikuach Nefesh. There are 3 sins that even though Pikuach Nefesh means when your life is in danger, there's a basic rule in Judaism. There are 613 mitzvahs. But if doing a mitzvah endangers your life at any given time, a person has to go to the hospital, has to get in a car on Shabbat, a person has to take a certain medication that could be not kosher. Well, that's totally permissible because you're not eating it. You're taking it in the way of refuah. You're taking it in the way of medication. But there are countless stories, or even if a person comes to you and threatens you, if you're not going to violate the Shabbos, I'm going to kill you. The law is you're supposed to violate the one Shabbos to be able to keep many more of the Shabbos experiences. And every mitzvah, pikuach nefesh, not just grudgingly, but pikuach nefesh is the most important of mitzvahs. Per pikuach nefesh means preventing damage to the body, preserving the human life, takes precedent over any other mitzvah. It's precedent. That's the mitzvah. And no hesitation and no reluctance. Because if you'd have a hesitation and say, well, should I or shouldn't I? A person could lose a life from that hesitation. But there are three that the Gemara says, and this is not even a Gemara. The Gemara brings it down, Toysus brings it down in Saita. It says three of them, however, no reluctance or no way can you do whatever you have to do to save the life. And it says, what are the three? And this is famous because you're familiar with the term, Yaharog ve'al Ya'avor. You have to be ready to be killed and die, rather, and I mentioned it last week in a lecture that I gave. Some of you were at that moment. Yaharog ve'al Ya'avor means that you have to give up your life for these three. Every mitzvah, it's Ya'avor ve'al Ya'arog. Do the sin, and do not give your life for that. Don't get killed for it. But these three, and what are the three? And you know, Avodah Zarah, worshipping idols, Gila Arayas, to violate a woman or a man in a sexual manner, and Shvichas Damim, murder. And I pose a question to you tonight, just to start. I understand the enormous harm that takes place if somebody says, I'm going to kill you if you don't kill someone. And therefore the law is you have to be ready to give up your life. If you don't, it's a sin, they don't punish you, they don't kill you for that, but nevertheless you have to. The din is Yarog Bal Yavar. I understand it. It's something that's irretrievable, irrevocable. If you kill somebody, you cannot say, I'm sorry, and I was forced to do it. It doesn't bring the person back to life. I can understand by Gila Aroyas, which is the Hebrew term for immorality, but it doesn't mean just immorality. It means if somebody says, I'm going to kill you, if you do not violate and attack, whether it's a woman, whether it's a man, whether it's to molest a child, and people, unfortunately, in the world, this is very prevalent. If you take a look at different countries in Africa, or you take a look when war, they have the warring factions. They go after the women. If you look at Bosnia and what happened over there, we're not getting into the political situation. This is the way of the world. So when somebody tells you to do something like that, you have to be willing to give up your life. But the third one is Avodah Zarah. If somebody tells you, you have to convert. Or you have to bow to an idol. And I ask the following question. The question is, I understand Shvichas Damim, killing, and I understand acting to violate another human being, a woman, a child, or a man in this crazy time that we live in. Different times that we live in. But what do you mean? A person is going to be forced, someone's going to put a gun to your head and say, bow down to this idol, or go into this church, or go into, so forcibly, I want you to convert, and you say, I'll go in, what's the big deal? I don't believe this. I'm doing it just to save my life. How is that put on par? Why is that put on par? Why is that put in equal? The other two, you can't turn back the clock once the damage is done. This, I never had in mind, I was thinking about gefilte fish the whole time. I wasn't, right? And we find something very interesting by Jews. You find it by non-Jews too, but by Jewish people you find that there were Jewish people who were not observant and were not committed. And it came an epic time in their life, a seminal moment when they were their life was on the line. You either have to convert or to a different religion or we'll take your life. And they were willing to give up their lives. Not every time, but there were tens of thousands of times. Matter of fact, Elie Wiesel, in his book, The Night, he writes a story of a friend of his father who his whole life was known as an atheist. And a German soldier, a Nazi soldier, came over to him and threatened him and says, say, you'll spit on the Jewish religion, you'll spit on the Jewish God. And he wouldn't do it. And he took out a pistol, put it to his head, and he said, do it or I'll kill you now. He says, no. And Elie Wiesel writes, he was a young teenager, he shot him dead on the spot. And he said he couldn't understand. Elie Wiesel came from a very Hasidic area of Hungary or Transylvania, and he became, of course, a Nobel laureate and for his writing. But he said he didn't understand. this man was a non-believer his whole life. What happened? So we're going to somehow engage this subject tonight, the subject of Emunah, the subject of faith. I had a story when we were living in Crown Heights, after we got married. There was a boy who came from this place called Grand Rapids, Michigan. And he lived in a suburb that he was the only Jew. And he wasn't really 100% Jewish. His father wasn't Jewish, but his mother was Jewish. So he was 100%. There's no, you're Jewish or you're not Jewish. But, and Judaism is the only religion that says you don't have to be Jewish and feels that Gentiles have a place in the world to come, similar to Jews. Different, but they also have a place in the service and worship and salvation. But he said, once he found out that he is considered Jewish, he found out by chance on a computer. On a computer he found out. My computer crashed today. I'm very grumpy. So what happened? He decided he bought a patch. He went to a store, like an Old Navy type of store, and a patch, and it said the word kosher in Hebrew. And he obviously couldn't read any Hebrew. He was brought up as a non-Jew. And he patched it, he had it on he ironed it on his coat. And he walked around with it. And he was going to university, and people came over to him and they said, "Hey, you're also Jewish. I'm Jewish too." And somehow his circle of finding out about Jews and Judaism, anyways, P.S. he ended up in my house at Crown Heights for Shabbos, but he ended up in a lovely family in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So where does this fit into the puzzle of the Jewish psyche? And I want to share with you some sources, and I'm not going to be too long, and just to try to get into some points that I think some of you may be familiar with, but I suspect most of you are not familiar with. And here is point number one. Maimonides is one of the few codifiers. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, who's called Rambam in Hebrew, is one of the few codifiers, there was not a dozen of them, who codified the 613 mitzvahs. And he did it in two of his seminal works. His first work that he has, the mitzvahs. That means he has mitzvah number 1 is this and this, mitzvah number 2 is this and this, mitzvah number 3 is this and this. So in his work called Mishneh Torah, which is his work of Jewish law, and before he begins the mitzvah, the work of Jewish law, he has the 613 mitzvahs, and he says, the first mitzvah of the Torah is, and I'm going to read you the word, Leida sheyesh sham Elokah, to know that there is a God. Shenemar, because it says in the Decalogue, in the Aseres Hadibros, in that is called the Ten Commandments, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God. That is the first mitzvah. Now, he didn't say you should believe that Hashem is your God. He said, Leida, you should know that, or it can be above understanding. It means when Einstein will try to explain to you the theory of relativity, and if you're not versed in what he's talking about, or if Stephen Hawking will try to explain to you something about the black hole, and you're not at all versed in astrophysics, you wouldn't understand too much what he's talking about. But so the Rambam writes in Mishneh Torah that the mitzvah that we learn from Anoichi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God, is the mitzvah to know that there's a God. To know. And because there is another scholarly work of the Rambam that he wrote, which is called Sefer HaMitzvahs, which is the book of the mitzvahs, which is dedicated only to explaining the mitzvahs, different, less elaborate. His father-in-law couldn't stand Hasidim. And in those days it was understandable because there was a concern that Hasidim would lead Jews away from Jewish observance. They would become heretics, as the tragedy of Shabtai Tzvi and Pesach Frank and historic tragedies that happened 100 years before. So his father-in-law really used to spend time trying to convince his daughter that she should get a get from this fellow because he's connected to the Mezritcher Magi, to Hasidim. But she loved him and she respected him and she understood that he was really a very pious, God-fearing Jew. And she says she's not getting a divorce from him. Anyways, after being away from home for 9 months, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditchver came and his father-in-law grudgingly invited him back to his house. And he said to him, "So what did you learn in Mezrich?" And he said, "I learned that there is a God in the world." And the father-in-law looked at him, not merely perplexed, he looked at him with disdain. He called over the poor orphan girl who was working in the house, the cleaning person, the one who served the food, and she called, she said, "Shprinza, come here, come over here. Tell me, Srana Gott of the Welt, is there a God in the world?" He says, "Yeah, of course." She says, "For this you went to Mezrich for 9 months to learn that there's a God?" And he answered, "She believes there's a God, and I know there's a God. I know as I know something with absolute certainty." So what does it mean? And what is the Rambam saying to know that there is a God? And let's recognize, notwithstanding knowing God, there is a mitzvah of hamonas elokus, to have faith in God. And I'm going to use the most basic elementary text of Judaism, which is the 10 Commandments, to just point out something, which is a classical question. I'm sure many of you have heard this before. The classical question is like this. The first of the 10 Commandments is, "I am the Lord your God. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Asher Yitzisicha mi'eretz Mitzrayim, that I took you out of the land of Egypt." So the commentaries ask, why is it said, "I took you out of the land of Egypt"? Wouldn't it have been a far greater point if it would say, "I am the Lord your God who created the heavens and earth. I created from nothingness. Creation ex nihilo. Bria yesh me'ayin." Why does it say that I took you out of Egypt, when it should have said a far greater achievement, that I created a world from nothing? And the commentaries answer that there is a creator to the world. If you let yourself, you can come to that understanding through your own human comprehension, knowledge. But that there is a God who not only created, but he interacts with the world. And when a person is suffering, and when a person is living a life in accordance with God, and then he does things, he has a life like Job of suffering, that you have to have faith. And therefore, the Decalogue, Aseres HaDibros, tells us, "I am Hashem, your God," that not only created the heavens and earth, that's the easy stuff. That's easy to understand. But that I'm with you when you're suffering. That I let and allow the horrors that take place in this world to take place. He says, that you need Emunah, that you need faith. We don't have to elaborate on that. Because horror is horror, suffering is suffering. The God who is there, and not only is there, but he's connected to every human being in a manner that the omnipresent, infinite God, according to our definition, is there. So we have over here this enormous challenge to have faith, and it's easy to have faith when you just won the lottery and when life is good, when your children are all following in the good footsteps and they're all successful in life, each one according to their level. But there's so many areas that can paralyze a person. There's so many pains. God should give us that none of us should have to go through it, but life is filled with struggles and challenges and pain and hardship and matters that you have to say either you believe in God or you don't believe in God. So says the Rambam, and what he is implying is that faith in Hashem takes over when contradictions take place in such a massive way. We are told that Hashem created the world because ki chofetz chesed. He wants kindness. He's addicted to kindness. We are told ki olam chesed yiboneh, that God created the world because of chesed. Now he has to practice what he preaches. So that requires a lot of faith. And it requires a lot of understanding, but we can never comprehend it. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he's a little boy, and you don't have to be a Lubavitcher to appreciate this, he used to say, he was to tell his mother and father, he was a very brilliant young man, you could call him a child prodigy, self-educated, but he used to say he could envision what the world will be like when the Mashiach will come. And he says the first thing that will happen when the Mashiach will come, people, great people will come to Mashiach and say, answer me this question, because in the Talmud we have a Talmudic terminology called Teku, that many questions, Tishbi Yataritz Kushias V'Abayas, that the Messiah is the only one, that sometimes you have an argument, one opinion is like this, Hanukkah candles, how are you supposed to light it? Now isn't Hanukkah candles something so simple? You light the first night one, the second night two, not that simple. Beis Hillel says you light it like that, but Beis Shammai says you light the first night 8, the second night 7, the third night, etc. Till the last night you light 1 because there's only one night left. So there are many, countless questions in Jewish law that at the end of the day, they didn't know how to answer it. They said only the Messiah will bring it. And not the Messiah, but Elijah the prophet, who the tradition is going to come 3 days before the Messiah will come. Only he's going to explain. Tishbi Yataritz Teku. So he said, the first question the Messiah will answer is, why did God's will have to take place through the avenue of suffering? Why did people, not everybody, but certain people had more? Why could not God, and it's not merely a theological, but it's a philosophical question. If God is kol yochel, is all
there is.
all able. He's able to do anything in any way. Achieve what you have to achieve without suffering. Mashiach will have to explain that. And that is actually true. Mashiach is going to explain. This is because of this and this is because of this. But the explanations don't help me now. It doesn't help a person now. So this is the challenge. And now we're going to take a little journey where I'm going to share with you something that I doubt if anyone ever heard this before. Not that I am so brazen, but I just found out about it. I wanted to look at a text, a deep text, and I opened up to this text, took an index and found an index, and I didn't even have to use a computer to find it. I didn't have to Google it. It's not a Google. And I found an old-fashioned index, and I looked it up, and I found these words. I said, oh my gosh. But let me tell you what it's based on. There is a pasuk in the Torah, in Parshas Nitzavim, in the book of Devarim, in Deuteronomy, that says the following. And I'm going to say it in Hebrew and then translate it in English. Ki korov eilecha hadavar me'oy, beficha bilvavcha la'asoisai. Ki korov eilecha. It's very close. What davar? What is very close? To serve God, to do all of the mitzvahs. It's very close. Beficha, with your lips, with your heart, and with your actions. This is a verse in the Torah. What is the Torah talking about? It's very close. What's close about it? Is it simple? Is it easy? How can you make this definition? How can you make a statement? How can a God Almighty tell us in the Torah, Ki korav eilecha, it's korav. There's another statement like this in the Torah. The Ata Yisrael, there's a verse that says, and this I wasn't planning on talking about this verse, but I'm going to say it anyways. Now Israel, Mo Hashem Elokecha shoyel me'imach. What does the Lord your God ask from you? Kiyim, only one tiny thing. Tie your shoelaces. No. What is the tiny thing he asks you? Kiyim le'yira es shemecha. You should have yira shemayim. That's all. And then he says, and you should do all the mitzvahs because you have yira shemayim. What kind of an expression? And the Talmud asks on this. What do you mean? The only thing I ask, like I'm saying, do me a favor. My car is parked on the wrong side of the street. Could you do me a favor? Open the front door. Here's my keys. Move it over to the other side of the street. That's not so simple in the winter here. You got to put on your boots. You got to put on your scarf. You got to put on your glove. It makes it sound like this is nothing with nothing. What nothing with nothing? It's a very hard thing to have Yirah Shamayim. And the Talmud answers, yes, it is simple. Legabe Moshe Miltza Zutrasi. For Moshe Rabbeinu it was easy. Well, that's a nice answer. For Moshe was Rabbeinu. What do I have to do with Moshe? Moshe was the greatest Jew who ever lived. And the greatest human perhaps who ever lived. And the greatest prophet who ever lived. And had the greatest interactive relationship with Hashem. And you saying because for Moshe it's easy, so for everybody it's easy. But what does this pasuk mean? And here I'm going to give you a little bit of insight that really, there's another verse that I want to share with you. That's all going to help unfold this mystery. There's a verse in the book of Lamentations. Eicha, chapter 3, verse 23. And it says something that is very simple, but there is a new twist on it that I will show you, a new nuance. It says 4 words, a verse with 4 words. Chadoshim Rabikorim Rabo Emunah. Chadoshim Rabikorim, every morning, Boker, we wake up Chodosh, refresh. You go to sleep exhausted. You get up, even if you don't sleep much, you're a bit refreshed, unless you have sleep apnea. Or unless you're watching Netflix all night. And you chodosh, right? Rabba emunasecha, great is my faith in you. Again, the word emunah. Great is my faith in you. That's the literal translation. But there is a nuance that says like this. And I'm going to read you the text because I wrote it down in Hebrew. Chadoshim rabkorim, when God gives you another day of life, when you wake up in the morning, it's not merely another day. Boring. One of my grandkids say that. Boring. Another day. Back to work, the old grind. God gives you another day because you're like chodosh. Like when you were born, there's a purpose. Every day there is a unique purpose that you have to do and achieve. And what is that purpose? Bear with me now. Rabba, to add more emunah, faith in your life. To develop a deeper and richer faith. Bear with me. We don't know what faith is yet. But bear with. We know that faith is something very special. It's the bedrock, it's the cornerstone, it's the yesod, the foundation. You get another day because God sees in you the ability to have greater faith. Let me read you the Hebrew because it's just mind-blowing. When I saw it, I said, what? B'chol yoyim, tzorech likdois benafsho. Each day, you have to acquire in your soul, meaning in your being, in your expression, in your desire, Emunah chadosha, a new faith. That it's not merely you're getting another dimension of faith. That it's like new compared to the faith, the emunah that you had the previous day. And it says, where do you have the ability to do this? It says the word mehamokor, because you get this energy from the source. What is the source? And the source that he's referring to is a place called Knesset Yisrael, the ingathering of Israel. And this in Kabbalah and in Hasidus is a place where all of the souls rest before they are sent on their mission to earth. It is the source of every neshama. Knesset Yisrael. In Kabbalistic term, it's Malchus Datzilus. But in just this term, whenever you'll see the term, and there are shuls that named their shul Knesset Yisrael, the ingathering of Israel, because they thought it's a nice name, Jews will gather here. The name is deep and it's from antiquity, the name. It is the place where your soul gathers energy to go out before it comes to its mission on this world. So here we're introduced to this concept, and then he says further in the text that everybody has a fixed amount of days, Yomim Kitsuvim, and he says, Bishvil sheyiskava v'yisraba ha'ora be'emunah. The reason why you have these fixed days and not less is that every day your faith in God should be richer, wider, broader. That's why you're given that extra day. I thought this was a powerful statement. Where did I never saw these words before? I really did. And it's based on this verse. The verse is, everybody knows what the Eicha is. Megillas Eicha is the book of Lamentations. It was written by Jeremiah the prophet so many thousands of years ago. You are given another day to live, because on that day you have to expand to a new level and a richer level of Emunah. Now comes the very simple question. The simple...
I'm sorry.
No.
Some cars blocking our neighbor.
Oh, okay.
Can you get your keys?
I have a problem with my classes. It happens all too often in my classes. How do we do this? How do you do it? How are you supposed to do this? Is our car out? It's our car? How could it be?
What does this mean?
What does this mean?
This is why it always happens in your class.
Because I'm the one who's parking? No, but I left at least 5 to 7 feet before I watched it. I was the only one parking.
No, it's not yours.
Anyways, let's try to get back focused over here. So how do you do this? How can you broaden your emunah? And I'm going to tell you something that is a song that when I was 15 years old in yeshiva, I didn't always go to Chabad. I was going to a yeshiva in Cleveland called Telzer Yeshiva, a famous Lithuanian tradition, and I consider myself still a Telzer Chabad. That's the way it is. And I can, it's just in me. It's in me, and I want it to be in me. So there was a song we used to sing only on Shavuos. And I remember Shavuos, which is the holiday commemorating the receiving of the Ten Commandments at Har Sinai. Shavuos, they used to dance, the whole yeshiva, and at that time there was 450 boys in yeshiva. Can you imagine 450 boys and the teachers, everybody's dancing, and there was one song. And the song that they sang, they had other songs, but this was like, when they sang this song, everybody became like a higher sphere of thought. Yisrael ve'oiraisa ve'kutsha brichu chatu. It's from the Zohar, actually. But there's a song, you I'm sure know, Yisrael ve'oiraisa ve'kutsha brichu chatu. And then they would sing, Torah is the light. Anyways, what do these words mean? Yisrael, the Jews, Oraisa is Aramaic for the Torah. The Kudsha Brichu is Aramaic for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God. Chadvu, they're all one. What does that mean? They're all one. Torah and Israel and God are one. And it is really, it's discussed that there's an open and a revealed part of all three of them. An open and revealed part of the Torah, there's Pnimius HaTorah and Niglat HaTorah, open and revealed part of God, which is called the Malach Kol Almin and Seviv Kol Almin. And if I have time tonight, I'll explain to you in a way that any man and woman, layperson, can understand what those terms mean. And esoteric understandings and sensitivities, then the conduit between God and the human is the study of the Torah and the practice of the Torah. Torah is called the will of God, Torah is called the wisdom of God. Chochmoso Yisborach, his wisdom. Ritzono Yisborach, his want, his desire that people do this and people do that. And this is really the way we sensitize ourselves. Faith has an intrinsic contradiction in Hebrew. Emunah means to believe something. To believe something means you believe, like blind belief. There are people they don't need more. If this is what Hashem wants, that's good enough for me. And then the same word emunah has the word uman, and I'm not talking where Rav Nachman is buried. Uman means a worker, a craftsman, somebody who has to work at something. That if you want to have proper emunah, if you want to have real emunah, you have to work. What do you have to work at? We say, I want to believe, I want to believe, I want to believe. No, that's not what you have. You have to work in making yourself sensitive to esoteric, to more than video games, television, movies, newspapers. Or if you're really an intellectual, you'll read the newspaper. You won't just take it off of CNN News and sorry, I get carried away sometimes. So this is to sensitize a person. And I'll tell you a story that I told at least 100 times. Because I see a few new faces, I'm going to say it again. There was a fellow, I'm not going to mention his name, because then I'll mention his name, as soon as you hear his name, oh, you heard that story already. So, he really had no connection to religion, and he was a searcher. He was searching for meaning in life, and his life was brilliant. He was a medical student, and he ended up going to school in Tufts University, and he became a very, very exceptional specialist, and he has a very big position today. But till he was 23 years old, he didn't do the only mitzvah he did is that he did not commit suicide. That was the only mitzvah that he practiced. And somehow in his search, he searched Eastern religions, he went into different forms of Christianity, and somehow he heard there was a rabbi who was a holy man, and his name was the Bostoner Rebbe, of blessed memory. Rabbi Levi Horowitz, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Horowitz, and he had a Jewish center, very vibrant, with a synagogue in Beekman Street, in that area in Boston. And he went to him because he heard that he's a spiritual leader, he's a giant. And he went to him with the amazing questions that were haunting him. He says, he can answer these questions, if he can make sparks fly, if he can show me the lightning and thunder. And he went into him, he got an audience with him, and he put a few of his questions to the rabbi, and then the rabbi said, I'm willing to dialogue and discuss and answer your questions. But first, I would like you to do something for me. He says, yes. I'd like you to, for 6 months, take upon yourself to put on tefillin, to eat kosher, and to keep Shabbos. And because he was very genuine and sincere, this person, and looking for something, he says, okay. And he walked out of his meeting. He said, am I an idiot? I don't want ritual. I didn't come here for ritual. I came here for lightning and thunder, for the Aseres HaDibros to be delivered on a platter. And he said then, but he gave him his word. Anyways, 3 months passed, 6 months passed, 9 months passed, he didn't come back to the rabbi. And the rabbi bumped into him in his shul. And he said to him, Yosef, his name isn't Yosef, the names have been changed to protect Yosef. Saying came to him, and he said, where are you? I'm waiting. And he said to him, the questions that I had 9 months ago are not questions to me today. That there is a power in the study of Torah, in the practice of the Torah's mitzvahs that sensitizes your mind and your heart in an amazing manner. And therefore, when the Talmud tells us, Barosa Yetzer Hara, I created an evil inclination, Barosa Torah Tavlin, I created a spice to neutralize that called Torah. It meant that when you study, when you practice, gradual increments, you don't go from 0 to 120 kilometers or miles per hour in one swoop, even if you're driving a Ferrari. But it will sensitize you. It is the conduit between infinite and the finite. There is nothing more finite than a human being. He or she is more finite than any animal, than any reptile, than any fish, than any bird. Because the human being is the only one who has the capacity to choose to be lower and more vicious than the worst animal, more beastly than a beast. Animals can't do the atrocities human beings can do to each other. And God is not infinite. He's more than infinite. He's infinite and finite together. And therefore, when you read in the Torah, this week's parsha, which speaks about the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the sanctuary, and you'll read about the Aron Kodesh, you'll read about the Ark of the Covenant, even if you didn't see Steven Spielberg's movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. No, I'm coming from California, but I'm not getting paid for every movie that I mentioned. Don't worry. I'm not a trailer. So, there was a place called the Holy of Holies that had a certain measurement, and in this Holy of Holies that had a certain measurement, they put an ark. And the ark contained in it the luchos, the tablets that the Ten Commandments were written, the broken pieces of the first tablets, and the first Sefer Torah that Moses initiated to be written. And other opinions say there was a jar of manna, and other opinions say there was the staff of Aaron, Aaron's staff, that the miracles. But once you put that ark there, it had to take up some. And then you worked around it, the circumference, you would think there would be less cubic space. And there was something a miracle that took place, that the same amount of space, raw space that existed before the ark was placed there, was still there after the ark was placed. Something that a human mind a finite mind can't understand. And it's called the Ha'oroin Eino Min Hamido. That the ark was placed, it was physical, but it was the essence of symbol of God, not infinite, but infinite and finite together, something the human being can't comprehend. Getting back to our topic. So therefore we've gradually developed a bit of a definition, and the bit of the definition is as follows. Number one, Emunah is the stuff that is so contradictory. The stuff that Abraham had to deal with, Avraham Avinu. When God says to him, nope, you're going to have a great mighty nation. You have no children now. You have one child from your concubine Hagar, and no children from Sarah, and you're going to have a child now. And Abraham said, I'm thrilled, but I'm happy with my one child from Hagar. He says, no. That's not going to be the progeny, your children, that will be like the stars and like the sand. That's not going to be. It's going to come from Isaac. And then when Isaac is a young boy of 37 years old, God tells him, Kachna bincha yichidcha asher ahavta, take your son, the one son. God didn't want him to twist. I have two sons. Take the one son, asher ahavta, that you love. I love both of my sons. And then he said, Es Yitzchak. Take him, b'haleu sham la'olah, and bring him up for a sacrifice. Now what should go through a normal mind? What's Avram? Forget it. I was going to say forget it. The pain of losing a child, right? is like, no one, we won't even talk about that. But his whole belief, what did Abraham preach his whole life? Monotheism. There's one God. What did all the other countries and nations and beliefs and religions do at that time? They sacrificed their children to the gods. And now God tells Abraham, where a person could respond, Abraham could say, listen, God, what are you doing? Hold on. You're going to ruin everything, God. You're making me do something that is against everything that I preach and everything I believe and everything that exists. I should sacrifice my son? Abraham didn't say boo. He said, if this is the will of God, that's Emunah. That's Emunah. And so how do we, and each and every one of us has, not Abraham, but people had more than Abraham. People had to watch the children. So that is when the challenge of Emunah, and at the same time to know God, to know that there is a creator, to know that it is not logical to say that the world is just by accident. As we would not accept that premise according to the Rambam, we wouldn't accept this by anything. Anything with order, anything with sequence, anything with wisdom, anything that emanates beauty, anything that has regularity, that rises and sets, and even the slightest, the smallest piece of vegetation. So this is what the Emunah and the knowledge of God according to the Rambam is. Work and study and think. Whether you study philosophical texts, whether you study Kabbalistic texts, whether you use a rational approach, whether you use a above rational approach, work and study to develop the knowledge of God. V'yodaito hayoim. You shall know ki Hashem hu Elokim, which I'm not going to explain what that even means. But the das, at the same time, the joy and the beauty and the purity of Emunah. And what helps us along? The Torah. The Torah gives us the energy. The Torah gives us the capacity. The Torah gives us the power and the ability. The Torah gives us the opportunity to be able to do this. But you know what? God sure picked funny creatures that he wants to believe this. You know, he should have made angels. He should have made people that have a greater threshold for spirituality. And I want to point something out to you. The Talmud says it in Gemara Brachos, on Daf Samach, page 60, folio page 60. And we say it every day in the prayer, every day in the Siddur. Whether you're a man or a woman, if you open up the Siddur and you say the first three blessings in the Siddur, from the first blessings, no matter what Nusach you're saying, but Elokai, my God, Neshama, the soul, Shenosata bi, that you gave in me, Tahoirahi, is pure. Every human being. Ata Varasa, you created it. Ata Yitzarta, you formed it. Ata Nefachta, you blew it into me. You gave it into me. Now look at the words. The first few words. Elokai, God. Neshama, the soul. Which neshama is he talking about? The godly soul. Every human being has a godly soul. Shenosata, that you gave. Be! What does be mean? To me! What does that imply? There's me, and I have a spiritual component of me, which is the godly soul, and me, who is not the godly soul, Nasata be. When you read it, just read it. You know, say, hey, God, you gave me a soul. But think of the words. It's implicit. It's clearly, the implication is because it is. And there is the verse, actually it's from the book of Job, but it's not in the book of Job. It's in, again, the Talmud in Bava Basra, where it discusses this poor fellow, Job. I mean, you know the story of Job? Job is the symbol of suffering. And I'm not going to talk about Job because that would be a lecture that would keep us here till daybreak. But the Job, in his frustration from all of his suffering, he said, Barosa tzadikim and barosa rishoyim. You created righteous and you created evil. And the Talmud asks the question, wait a minute, did we not learn in the Gemara and Nida, in a different tractate of Talmud, that certain things are destined? Oni or Osher, if you'll be rich or if you'll be poor, if you'll be very successful, if you won't be successful. You know, you can be a happy human being even not being successful. You can be an unhappy human being if you're very successful. Gibor or Cholosh, if you'll be destined, if you'll be strong, if you'll be weak. In 3.5 minutes, I've turned into a pumpkin. I have my time. But tzaddik v'rosha lo yikama. It doesn't say righteous or evil. It says, on the contrary, that's up to your own free choice. That's what you live for, to make those choices. So what does it mean? And I'm going to give you an amazing explanation now. Not because it's mine, because it's not mine. I'm just the conveyor. I'm just like the tape recorder. Or blabbermouth, if you want to say. And what is the explanation? That it's based on this pasuk. Isaac told his son Esau, "V'osu li matamim kasher ohavti." You should make for me mazem matamim, delicacies. Kasher ohavti, like I love. So the literal explanation is: bring me some sweet and sour meatballs, and bring me some sweet plum sauce chicken, and bring me some. Well, what do you call the fish stuff that I can't stand? That people sushi. The sushi becomes sweet and sour. I'm outnumbered in my family. Everybody loves sushi, except must be something wrong with me. And there are two delicacies. So the literal translation is talking about delicacies, and the inner explanation of this is explained in chapter 27 of Likutei Amorim. Which it says, Matamim, the delicacies, God has a delight in two types of service, two types of people. One person is like a tzaddik. He's a tzaddik because he does these 3 sins that I just told you about at the beginning of the talk a few minutes ago. Hollywood. A minute and a half left. Matamim, delicacies. There are certain people, their life is, they're born with a high threshold for good. They're born with a high threshold for spirituality. They're born with a high threshold for study. They're born for a high threshold of goodness and kindness. They're born with a very low threshold of jealousy. They're born with a low threshold of envy. They're born like that. And God says, you have a service. You have a mission. Your mission is what? And then there's what Job was saying, Barasa Rishoyim. Not that the people will sin and be evil, but you're always struggling. There's always a struggle to do good. Doesn't come natural. My self-centered focus is very strong. My desire to do the wrong thing is very high. And that type of person can feel, I'm worthless. Forget about this religion bit. It's not for me. I always want to do the wrong thing. I'm doing this thing for 20 years, 30 years, and I still want to do what's wrong. I still like to do what's not appropriate. So you should say, no. God made sweet, and He made sour. And sour is a delicacy. And the avodah, the service of working with yourself, of bending yourself, of controlling yourself, of being able to assert a new habit for yourself by enough consistent work, and this could be a lifetime. It doesn't mean that sometime you graduate to the level of sweet. That document is your godliness. And your godliness is like a flame. And therefore King Solomon said in the book of Proverbs, Ner Hashem the candle of God is nishmas adam, is the soul of man. That every human being who has a soul, you have to have a soul. If you have a soul, then you have an ability to express the most spiritual, the most godly, and good in the magnificent. So, anyways, as I was telling you, that's all, folks. Any questions? Do we have questions and answer a little bit? If you have any questions,
People have to go to the other end.
if you have to go to the Daf Yomi, I wish you Godspeed and good mazel and Baruch Shia.
I want to thank you on behalf of everybody for coming, preparing.
My
Thank you
pleasure.
very much.
My pleasure. Okay. Any questions, please?
Yeah.
Yes, Aaron.
Well, it's a simple one, and I could elaborate the question. Any atheist will tell you there is no God. Why? Because there is no proof. On the other hand, there is so much evil in the world which God could maybe have to prevent it, and He didn't. He or she. So the question could be in two ways. One is, should the person abandon his need for proof? It's one on one hand.
Good question.
And for the atheist, what would you tell the atheist?
Well, the first thing, let's talk about not the atheist to start with. The person who says, give me proof. First define the parameters of what proof will be acceptable. Tell me, what will be the proof that will be acceptable? You have here an event that took place 3,300 plus years ago. The revelation at Sunday. You have people who are still committed and practicing this particular point in principle of this event. That means, and not only they're practicing it, but they're practicing it in a similar manner the way it was practiced 3,000, 2,000, 1,000, 1,000, 100 years ago. That means a mezuzah, for example. Anytime a Jew puts a mezuzah on his doorpost, he is practicing a mitzvah. You have mezuzahs today, and the mezuzah today, and if you go into the writing of the Code of Jewish Law of Yosef Cairo, 500 years ago, if you go into the writings of the Rambam, 850 years ago, and you go into the writing of Rav Saadia Gaon 1,000 years ago, and you go into the writing of the Amoraim 1,500 years ago, you will find there's a consistency. Not only there's a consistency, they even have the same discussion 2,000 years ago. How are you supposed to affix the mezuzah to your door? Is it supposed to be straight? Is it supposed to be flat? Or is it supposed to be ma'arachsen? And therefore they have the position the same way we affix it. Now this isn't one isolated incident. You have a group that says we don't represent only our group. We represent mankind. We also represent that mankind has a diversity. That everybody doesn't have to be a party card-carrying member of our group. But that there is one creator. And remember, there are many people who believe in one creator. As a matter of fact, there are billions. Thanks to our cousins, the Muslims. But you're talking about there's certain points that we have and continues to have throughout the history that still exist to this very day. There's never been a break in the chain. And the linkage is there. And we can trace from the biblical, whether you accept the Bible's view, whether you're a believer in the Bible's view of creation, or the longevity, or the flood, or any of the episodes that we are told, you still have a lineage, you have a chain. So your only way of refuting that chain, that means you can still trace your history back. If you have genealogical tools, you could trace your way back all the way to Abraham. And even if a person converted to Judaism, they could trace their roots. If they could go back, they would trace their roots back to the Jewish root. Because there was a very famous rabbi. He was either the Chadushi Arim, one of the Rebbes from Gur. that he said anyone who converts to Judaism and embraces Torah and mitzvahs in a genuine manner, that they want to be part of the Jewish people and they want to observe the practices that God has told the Jewish people He wants them to do, that person, if you check their roots, there was a Jew someplace or Jews in their roots, and somehow they became mixed amongst and lost amongst, for whatever reason, through persecution or through whatever the reason. And therefore they came out to convert in 1997, in 1982, in 1846, in 2010. That means that there was something there, and he proves this, he said, because in the Talmud, and I've said this many times, it doesn't call a convert a goy shenisgayer, a Gentile who converts, it calls a convert a ger shenisgayer. That means there's some type of a status of being a ger even before you convert. So the point I'm trying to say is like this. There are certain people that will look at sunrise and sunset and say, wow, there's a God in the world. And there's certain people that say, look at that shmendrik, that bum that lives over there, what he just did, and he just got out of jail and he's going to do it again. Is there a God in the world? Certain people will look at the fact that they survived the hand of God. Certain people will say, is there a God in the world? All that thing can happen? So, human beings are complex, and human beings have it's very hard to really put yourself in somebody else's shoe and be judgmental on the person and say he's bad. An atheist chooses to be an atheist. It's a belief in atheist. You have to be a believer to be an atheist. It's not you can't say I don't believe. If you believe, if you're not an atheist, but you say, look, I believe in some creator, like Einstein said or Spinoza said, they believe in a creator, they just don't believe that this creator really interacts or gives a hoot what's going on over here now. And in Jewish scholarship and philosophy, it speaks about this. It says they accept that there was a borei olam, they accept there was a creator, but bora the ozav es ha'olam. He created and he abandoned the earth. And then he says, okay, men and women, you're on your own. Make a case for it. One can make a case for anything. One can make a case for anything, but the bottom line is, everything that people say, agnostic, for example, says, I don't know. The atheist is a hardcore committed person. I remember last year in California, because I'm just new to Ottawa. I just came in September of 2012, and I was here for 31 years before 2008. There was a tremendous tone. And this is only idiotic California can do this. It's not the whole California. But there was a certain place, certain area, Santa Monica it's called. And they had a tremendous park there called Santa Monica Park. And the Santa Monica Park, every year, before the holiday seasons, let's face it, America is predominantly a Christian country, as Canada is predominantly a Christian country. Maybe it'll soon be a Muslim country, but right now it's still a Christian country. So they have these tremendous billboards and displays, and they would give it to different Christian, some evangelical, the different denominations of Christianity, and they would give them these areas, and they would make these beautiful scenes, the scenes of the nativity and scenes of this and so on and so on. Anyways, of Tzalachis, the Atheists Association of California, they went to the Board of Regents of the council people of Santa Monica, which is, Los Angeles is gigantic, and this is one little area, and they said, we demand equal. So in their astute wisdom, they said every group will be able to have as many these things as these areas to decorate with their ethos and their beliefs as they wish, and we're going to choose by goyrel, by a lottery. So, for example, for the Protestants, they put in a certain amount, and they put in a certain amount for the atheists, and the Yetzer Hara and the Satan, when you give a chance, from 15 sites, 9 of them were won by the atheists. And there was an outrage. And the radio talk shows were going crazy. Was the people nuts or something? So there's one Orthodox Shomer Shabbos radio host His name is Michael Medved. He's about tshuva. He's very popular, and he's probably the brightest. He's of course right wing, but right wing with heart, and right wing with a little bit of common sense too.
He had one thing on
What's
it.
that?
He voted for Obama.
Michael Medved didn't vote
The
for
first
us.
time.
He did? That's what, oh, you heard him? You heard? I don't know that. Anyways, whoever he voted for, so he would invite the president of the Atheist Society to come on the radio, and he was asking us, he says, could you please explain to me, what exactly bothers you that other people are having pleasure from the Christmas holiday season? What bothers you? He says, because they're trying to impose their, what are you talking about? And he would like really chop him up, and it would be open phone line, and they would bombard him. And what was the names? One president, the presidents was named Rosenfeld, and the vice president was named Goldberg. And so, in the civil liberties, an enormous propensity of Jews, an enormous proportion of Jews would be part of this Mishigas. That one decides he wants to be or she wants to be an atheist, that's your prerogative. But when you have to impose, when it bothers you, and it bothers them, by the way, a Hanukkah menorah, public menorahs also. It bothers them. You're fostering this type of coercion, and you know. So this is a religion. Let's understand. Atheism is a dogma by many also. And it requires a belief. And even the person says, look, I believe, I'm not a creationist, I believe in the theory of relativity, and even though there's all kinds of scientific fact, I believe in random this, and I believe in selective this, and so on and so forth. I really didn't want to discuss that. I don't want to go into this now, because this is a lengthy discussion. But it's a belief. You believe in this. You believe. You say, what do you mean there's carbon dating, and there's this, and then that, and what could it be? Only a few million, 10 million, 20 million years old. I mean, you have to be committed to this. There's a commitment that is required. So, when you're talking about a person, if a person was not instructed, if a person did not have experiences in religion, in Jewish religion, in Yiddishkeit, in the beauty of a Shabbat, the beauty of a Chag, the beauty of a festival, in the commitment of the mitzvahs, whether it be the mitzvah of mikveh, taras hamishpacha, whether it be the mitzvah of tefillin, a person that knows it looks like from the moon. And that's why these people are not called sinners, they're called, a person is called a tinik shenishpa, like a child that was brought up in a non-Jewish environment. Because if his parents adopted him and they were non-Jews, and they brought him up in such a manner, after the Holocaust, there were many stories of Jewish orphans whose parents gave them away to Christians and Catholics, in Poland in particular, and they were brought up really as Catholics, and one of them became the Archbishop of Paris, Lustiger. And he was one of the candidates once upon a time to be the Pope. He could have been chosen Pope. And he spoke a perfect Yiddish. Because he still remembered the Yiddish of his home. And he actually once traveled to Israel to visit his cousins. His cousins wanted to have nothing to do with him. The cousins that did manage to survive, his parents didn't survive the war. His parents didn't survive the war. His cousins didn't survive the war. He came to Israel. And, you know, he spoke and he made a point to study Hebrew and this and so on and so forth. So once there was a Chabad rabbi, a very, very fine man, he's not alive anymore. His name was Rabbi Berger, Hillel Pesner from Paris. He had a school of 1,500 girls, a girls' school, a very, very fine school in Paris. And he was once at a community, a government event where he was there, the Archbishop was there. And he walked by the Archbishop and he said, Herschel, bist noch als a Yid. Still a Jew. Kennst noch als Tshuvaton. And he said this thing. So, you know, the complexity of life is one of the Messianic promises, and we say it in our prayers on the high holidays, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, It says, U'bo'u ha'oivdim me'eretz Ashur. V'anidochim me'eretz Mitzrayim. The Ovdim, the lost Jews from Assyria. Meaning, it'll go back thousands of years. People who think they are not Jewish or don't know they are Jewish will somehow be brought back. Not because they're going to be in a higher, better level. It's better to be a Jew. Not that it's better to be a Jew. But if it's part of your spiritual identity, then you have a spiritual potential that can be expressed and can be developed. And if you don't develop it, then unfortunately you're being wasted. It would be tantamount. There's a famous metaphor that Rabbi Schneerson, blessed memory, the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, that everything that exists in the world, and the world is divided not only in general scientific terms, but in chakira, in the philosophical and the inquiring dimension of Torah study. The world is divided into 4 different categories. One is called inanimate objects. In Hebrew it's called doimen. Another is called someach, someach is vegetation. Third is called chai, animals. And the fourth is called medaber, the human. And the interpretation was that each one starts with inanimate. For it to be productive, it has to connect itself to a higher form of life. It has to express a higher form. So that means when you have a field that's just a desert, and there can be no vegetation growing there, you call it desolate. You call it a wasteland. And if vegetation can grow there, then you call it productive. What Israel has done to many of its lands, with its hydroponics and ways of watering and etc., that is like the envy of the world. Then you take the vegetation, the growth, the plant kingdom. Plants have a greater form of life. They grow, they need to be cut, they need to be watered, they need to have sunshine. But plants, for them to be called productive, they have to connect to either animals have to be able to graze on them, humans have to be able to look at them. There has to be some type of, or eat from them. I mean, if it remains just grass that is unusable by any other species of a higher form of life, in the sense that there's more recognition that it's alive, then it's also called like wild grass. And then you take animals, and you follow this till you come to humans. And humans, notwithstanding vegans and vegetarians, humans, however, they have to connect also to a higher form of life. And what is their higher form of life? That is elokus. That for a human being to remain purely human, and his life is committed only to pursuing human pursuits, even if they're intellectual pursuits, but he doesn't connect to the spirit, doesn't connect to something spiritual, then he or she falls into the same category as a piece of desert that nothing can blossom there. Blossoming is connecting to something that is higher. So this is, I guess, part of the challenge. And Emunah is something, I want to make one little footnote over here to the previous footnotes. You don't have to have Emunah Shlema to be able to do the mitzvahs of the Torah, to be able to do that. At the end of the day, and this is not to be taken literally, but it's to be taken as an understanding that Judaism is not merely a religion of faith. The whole religion is not expressed in faith. It's expressed in faith, it's expressed in talk, it's expressed in eating, it's expressed in drinking, it's expressed in learning, it's expressed how you act at work, it's expressed in many, many different manners. It's different than any other religion. There's no religion in planet Earth today that by eating a hamburger or a hot dog, you're doing something that is a spiritual experience. You like hamburgers, you like hot dogs, you like with mustard, you like with relish, you make sure it's kosher. That means you disqualify a lot by that, and you make a blessing before. You have to make a blessing after. And in the middle of the appointment, the rabbi was blabbering away to him. He didn't know we wanted his support for something. Then all of a sudden he says, "Oh, excuse me," took off. He says, "What happened? What now?" He says, "I have to daven mincha." So the rabbi got up and he took out his little black cord, his gartel, put it on, and all of a sudden he goes in the corner and he starts davening mincha. Just the smallest of prayers. And he's sitting there. He's now a nervous wreck, this scientist. He says, "What am I supposed to do? He made a synagogue here. Am I allowed to do it? Is it a violation of something if I do this?" And he's not a shul man and not observant and nothing. And he came home that night. He said, "You're never going to believe what happened. I gave a rabbi an appointment. He wanted my support. I told him no. But I tell you, I never met a person like this. There's such personal belief and such commitment. He's waiting for this appointment for 6 months. And then he has a higher calling. He has to daven mincha in the middle, and he's davening mincha at my office." And anyways, he ultimately became very close with this rabbi, very close with other rabbis. He ultimately became an observant Jew. And he said the hardest thing for him, when he first became about tshuva, because he did a lot of travel as his work as scientist in NASA, was that he had to, in Chicago, O'Hare Airport, which is one of the biggest, today I think it's the second biggest airport in the United States, or the biggest I think is in Atlanta, but I really don't know. Once upon a time, O'Hare was the biggest there. He said, "I would always chap a nash." And they had these hot dog stands. And I would chap a hot dog. And then once I became kosher to the level that once I became committed that I'm going to start keeping kosher, all of a sudden I would walk by a hot dog stand and I would feel a tremendous, ooh, that hot dog. And then he said, "What, am I nuts or something? I mean, I'm going crazy for a hot dog now. I can't control myself for a..." So life is a struggle, and life is development, and people who live life are constantly growing. People who stagnate. I have a good friend in Ottawa, and he says, he's in his 90s, and he says, "Never become old. Become older. You become old, means you stop. Older is a process.
There's future.
It's older. Older. My father-in-law, my wife's father, when he was in his 90s, he was a true, he epitomized the chassid. He was happy, he was b'simcha. He managed to interpret everything for good. He survived the war. He came to... Anyways, he had, thank God, a very unique life. And he came here, he would talk to people in his 90s about making donations to the yeshiva in Montreal and talk to them about the long-term plans, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, as if he was going to be around. I mean, he made it till 94, but which is nice. And I had somebody in shul by us, I davened in the Chabad at the center point. It had Yortzeit for his father, and then his father died at 102. So certain people, have enormous longevity, but when you have meaning in your life, and every person can have meaning if they recognize they have a spirit. If they recognize that, if life is only my body, well, let me tell you, as the older you get, even Pierre Trudeau recognized that you can't always ski down the slopes like when you were 30 years old. So, if your existence is your body, then the older you get, it starts getting very, very frightening. Not that you're walking around in absolute fear, but what do you have to look forward to? But if a person lives with a spirit, he recognizes he has a neshama. He recognizes in depth, in truth, in sincerity, his neshama is the essence of his life. And once you recognize you're a neshama, and once you recognize God, rather, once you come to an understanding that you have a relationship with God, that you're here in this world for a unique purpose that nobody else can repeat. There's no duplicate. God didn't use a photocopy machine. Kishem she'en partzufeim shavim, just like faces aren't equal, so also ein deoseim shavim. No minds are equal, no perspectives are equal. And that's one of the beauties about the mitzvahs. We have the same code of mitzvahs, but everybody does it different. It means you follow the rules, but everybody invests in a piece of themselves and what they do, and that makes it unique. My putting on tefillin and your putting on tefillin are not the same, even though on one hand, we're all the same. And on the other hand, we're dramatically different because my investment of my spirit, of my mind, of my kavanah, my intention, of my feelings is not the same as your feelings. So we have an amazing gift that we can give. We can say truly, Ashreinu matoi cholkeinu. Thank you, Almighty, for our lot in life, that we have an awareness that there is a God. And anybody in this room has an awareness, whether they are a believer presently or not a believer, everybody has an awareness. If you have an interest in the subject, you have an awareness. And it may not be part of you, but everybody has the ability to enhance and expand and develop that understanding of faith and trust in God. Because that means you have a relationship. When you trust somebody, it means you have a relationship. Now there's trusting of a child trusting. There's trusting of a friend. And there's trusting that a spouse can trust. And there's trusting of a business partner. And there's all levels of trust. And when you have that emunah, you have faith. You have faith in the trust and trust in the faith. Because there are two different terms really, and we're not going to talk about it tonight. Emunah, which is faith, and bitochen, trust. But once you start on the pathway of Emunah, you're opening up a new relationship. Not only with God, a new relationship with your soul, with your inner self, with the hidden part of you. We all know, anyone who has done any research in education, we're constantly doing research, the majority of the human brain is not used. A majority of the intellectual capacity, that means a computer is given a certain amount of megabytes, and even that you can't use all the megabytes most of the time. But when you reach that you've overextended the megabytes, you got to get a better motherboard, what do you call it, right? You got to do something to the human being doesn't have that problem. He doesn't have to turn in his brain and his heart and his soul for a more upgraded, with a better capacity, because we don't use our capacity. Certain studies say that we only use our intellectual usage of the brain is between 4 and 6%. Otherwise, we're busy with other things. We have really a lot of other things to do. And that's part of life. That's the way God created us. But the question is, how can you really increase, enhance, be open? Be open to recognize that you have a brain. Be open to recognize you have a heart, an emotion. Be open to recognize that you have the capacity for faith, to develop this faith. So that is the answer that we'll say in a nutshell. Yes. This is a very interesting question. I wish all of you a good evening, and you should all have a happy Purim, and you should celebrate only Mishenichnas Oder Marbim B'Simcha. We should all have the blessing of God to have cause to celebrate occasions of joy and happiness for all of your life, family, and for a peaceful, tranquil living.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen.
Baruch Tiyeh. Bruchim Tiyeh.